هذا وقال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم بعد أن أقول أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله لا يضيع أجر المحسنين صدق الله العظيم وصدق رسوله النبي الكريم ونحن على ذلك لمن الشاهدين والشاكرين والحمد لله رب العالمين وبعد. Honorable elders, brothers and youngsters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We live in a world in which we receive a lot of short-term stimuli. What I mean by this is, as cell phone technology and smartphone technology has progressed in the past 30 years, we see that apps like TikTok, Facebook, YouTube are very popular. We are constantly on our phones, especially the younger generation. I know the older folks are probably on WhatsApp, Facebook. The younger guys are on TikTok, Instagram. And relative to the past, the duration of the content we consume has decreased significantly. Let me give you an example. A few hundred years ago, when the printing press came into play, the things that were being printed were more long form content. Because before that, it was the very elites or the people who were rich or the people who had access to a lot of resources, only they were able to consume knowledge through books. But after the printing press, as books became more common, we saw that even the normal person was learning how to read and write, and they were able to have access to this huge store of knowledge through books. And if you look at books, they're usually long, there are many chapters, and it takes some time to consume these books. It's not something that you're consuming right away within 15 seconds. And so the way this wires your brain is to also think in a longer term. It's to also think in chapters. Just like how you're reading in chapters, you also think on a larger scale. But unfortunately, as we've seen in recent times, people have been consuming shorter and shorter forms of content. And I believe this also rewires your brain to think in very short time spans. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ, that verily Allah does not let the good deeds of the people who do these good deeds, He does not let them go to waste. Now, many a times we might be doing the good deeds, we might be doing our dhikr, we might be praying our salah, we might be giving to charity, but we don't see the benefits of those good deeds immediately. And so sometimes we might become despondent and we might think that, oh, why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not helping me? Or why am I not receiving the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And I believe this rewiring of the brain happens because we're so used to getting this short-term stimuli. That you see a short-term video, you see a 15-second video, and you just see everything happening really quickly. And so your brain expects, that I should receive the rewards for this immediately. But we know very well that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that no good deed ever goes to waste. Whether it's in this world or in the hereafter, without a doubt, we are going to be rewarded for the good deeds that we do. There's a very famous story of a wise farmer. And I believe this story very well depicts this principle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us in the Quran. So this farmer used to live in the mountains, and it was a small village of a few people, and so everyone kind of knew everyone else. It was like a small community. And this was before modern technology. This was before they had tractors and all this farming equipment. And so he had one horse, and this horse was of immense help to him because it would help him plow the field, it would help him move things from one area to another, it would help him transport all of his grain that he had for the year. And so this horse was very critical to his farming operations and how he sustained himself and his family. Now, one day this farmer wakes up and he realizes that the horse has broken out from his stable and the horse has run away. And so though the word slowly spreads throughout the village because it's a very small village. And so some of the villagers come by and they tell him, this is very unfortunate that your horse has run away, this and that. And the man doesn't speak much. And in his wisdom, all he says is maybe. The villagers are telling him it's very sad and unfortunate this happened to you. And he says maybe to that. That's all he says. And so a few days later, life goes on. And he notices that his horse is running back. It's coming back. And not only is the horse coming back, but it's coming back with three more wild horses. And so now he has four horses, and he gets them all together and he stables them up. And once again, the word spreads in the village, and the villagers come by and talk to him. And they say, "Oh wow, look how lucky you are! Look how fortunate you are! Now you have four horses. You have four times as much capacity as you had before. Imagine, think of all the work you can do, and how much of a help these horses are going to be to you." And so the man listens to all this. He listens to everything the villagers have to say. And once again, all he says is maybe. He doesn't agree with them. He doesn't disagree with them. He just says maybe. Now a few more days pass, and the farmer also has a son, and his son is trying to tame one of the horses. And so he's trying to tame one of the horses, and the horse being a wild horse, it's not easy to tame. And so it gets up on its hind legs and it throws the farmer's son off the horse. And when the farmer's son is thrown off the horse, he breaks one of his legs. And so once again, the villagers get news of this, and so they come around to him. And they tell him, "Oh, look how bad it is that it's happened to your son. It's very unfortunate that happened. It's very sad that this happened." And once again, the farmer, in his wisdom, all he says is maybe. Right? He does not agree with them, nor does he disagree with them. He just says maybe. And so now the son, he has a cast on his leg. They took him to the doctor. They did the work he had to, get done on his leg. And a few days pass, and the country in which they were residing, a war broke out between them and the neighboring country. And so now the officers of the army are coming by, and they're going house to house, and they're enlisting every bodied able young man to go to the war. And so they come to the farmer's house, and the farmer is obviously too old to go to war, but then they see that, oh, this guy has a son. And so they look at his son, but unfortunately for them, the son has a broken leg and he cannot go off to war with them. And so the villagers get news of this again, and they come by again and they congratulate the farmer. "Oh man, look how lucky you are. We have to send our children off to war, and who knows what's going to happen to them. But luckily your son, he got hurt, and fortunately because of that he was able to spare his life and not go to war." And so once again, the farmer just says maybe. And so this series of events throughout this farmer's life just explains, or it shows us that things are not linear. Things are not, cause and effect. It's not so simple as, okay, this good thing happens and it's going to lead to this good thing. And sometimes a bad thing happens and it may lead to a good thing. And then sometimes a good thing happens and it may lead to a bad thing. But that just shows how these things are complicated and how these things are, they're not very singular in that way. And only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has that full insight into things, whereas we may only see one part of it. I'm sure you guys know that famous quote that people always mention, that sometimes people miss the forest for the trees. And so that's also like that same principle where, sometimes we might be only looking at that tree, but we can't see the whole forest. Whereas Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has that top-down view and He's able to see how all things interact with each other. And so sometimes, because we might be so short-sighted and we might think that, oh, I did this thing or I did this good deed, but I don't see the reward for this good deed. Or I don't see how this good deed is directly impacting me in my life. Or even worse, we might think that I did this good deed, but then this bad thing happened to me, just like in that story of the farmer. But things are way more complex than we think they are, and only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has full insight into these things. And that's what He says to us, and He reminds us again, that إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. That indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He doesn't waste your good deeds. He will never let a good deed go to waste. Whether it is in some form in this world or in the hereafter, we will be compensated for that good deed. Not only the good deed, but also if we have good intentions. If our heart is pure, and we intended to do something good, but unfortunately there is some problem or there was some glitch in that execution, and we are not able to execute on that good deed, even then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will still reward us. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mentions a hadith in which he says, "Ad-du'a mukh al-ibadah." He's referring to dua. Now, the reason why I want to speak about dua and some of these other forms of worship that might seem minute is because most of the times we think that these things are very inconsequential. We think something like dua, something like dhikr, very minor, just do some dhikr. We don't expect something big out of it versus, someone who builds a masjid or someone who has a lot of power and is doing a lot of great charity work. people. You might think that something like dua, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, very simple, or dhikr, just remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on a constant basis, very simple. But the reality is that these things are also as great as some of these other actions that we deem to be great. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that dua ibadah, that dua is the essence of worship, right? Not only did he say that it is a form of worship or it is akin to worship, but he said it is the essence of worship. There's a beautiful story of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, which exemplifies the outsized impact that something like dhikr, something like dua can have. Now, this takes place uh, many hundreds of years ago, in which Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah, he was one of the greatest scholars of that time. And not only that, but he was so well known in the Muslim world, you could almost think of him as a celebrity. Because the scholars at that time, not only were they scholars, but also they were people who were looked up to in some sense by normal people. Nowadays, we have influencers on these social media sites, but back in the day, there was no internet, there was no phone. They didn't have influencers in that sense, but they did have these great scholars that they would look up to in the Muslim world. And so Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, he was one of those scholars. And he was so famous at that time that it's mentioned that after he passed away, within 24 hours, there were 1 million people who came to pray Salatul Janazah on him. And this was just 24 hours after he passed away. And you have to think that in that time, information doesn't spread as quickly as it does now. It's more word of mouth, it's more horses, it's more, from one person to another. And so even the word of his passing spreading, and then people getting that information, and then people coming to where he was buried, to pray 1 million people is a huge number. Just to put that into perspective, the population of the GTA, including all of the boroughs of the GTA, is about 6 million. And so if you just think 1 million people in that time coming to pray Salatul Janazah on a person, you can just see how famous he was. But regardless, during the life of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, he used to travel a lot, and this was in pursuit of knowledge. And so on one of his journeys, he was traveling, and he traveled to Sham. And when he came to Sham, at that time there weren't hotels in the way that there are now, or this infrastructure wasn't as built up as it is now. So it's not easy to go find a hotel in the city here and there. And so his plan was that, okay, he's going to go to this masjid, and he'll try to sleep in the corner of the masjid, and then he'll move on the next day to his location. And so he comes to this masjid, and it's after Salatul Isha, and he prays the Isha, he does his worship, and he's about to get ready to lie down in the corner of the masjid when the security guard of the masjid comes by. And the security guard of the masjid comes by, and he sees Imam Ahmad putting his sleeping bag down and trying to lie down there. And so he says to him that, look, you can't sleep here. I'm going to close up the masjid right now, and there's no one allowed to stay in the masjid overnight. And the thing is, he didn't recognize Imam. Everyone had heard of Imam Ahmad, right? But at that time, you don't know what someone looks like. Because now we see everybody on our phones or on newspapers, you can see their pictures. But at that time, they didn't have cameras, they didn't have a way to actually take pictures of people. So even though Imam Ahmad was famous and the whole Muslim world knew of him, they didn't know what he looked like. He could look like this guy, or this guy. No one knew. And also, Imam Ahmad, being the humble man he was, he didn't play that card, that, oh, I'm the famous Imam Ahmad. But he just complied with the security guard. He said, look, I understand, you have to do this. And so he went outside to the steps of the masjid, and he thought, okay, I'll just sleep in front of the masjid, by the steps of the masjid, and this should be okay. And so he's once again putting his sleeping bag down there again, and the security guard is taking his rounds. He comes by again, and he says, look, this is all the masjid property, you can't even sleep on the steps, and he kicks him out from the steps. And not only does he kick him out, but he drags him with his legs and takes him to the middle of the street and drops him in the middle of the street. And so Imam Ahmad just, he's lying there in the middle of the street now, thinking to himself, okay, I can't sleep here. And he's thinking what he should do now. And in the midst of this, there was a baker who had his bakery right in front of the masjid. And he saw this whole thing playing out, and he saw that, oh, this poor man, he's trying to sleep here, but unfortunately, he can't sleep here. The guard just kicked him out. And so he says to this man, he says to Imam Ahmad, look, I'm going to be making bread overnight in my bakery. And if you want, you can rest in my bakery while I'm making bread. And so Imam Ahmad takes him up on his offer and he goes and he tries to lie down in one corner of the bakery. And as he's lying down there, he's just observing this man making bread. And the baker, he's kneading the dough, and so he's doing his work as a baker does. And whilst he's baking, he's doing this dhikr, he's doing this subhanallah, he's doing this alhamdulillah, he's doing this Allah Akbar. It's very simple dhikr, but he's doing it immediately over the night. And so as hours go by, he's just slowly kneading the dough, he's making the bread, and he's remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continuously. It's just on his tongue constantly. And so Imam Ahmad, seeing this, he was taken back by this great action of this man. And he said to him, he said, look, I understand that this dhikr that you're doing is very great. And he understood the reality of the dhikr, being the scholar that he was. And so he asked that man that as a result of this dhikr that you do daily, what have you seen in your life because of this? What has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala given you? What rewards have you gotten for this? And so the man, he says to Imam Ahmed, he says that there is no dua that I made to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepted that dua. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has accepted every single dua of mine. But then he says one thing, he says, He has accepted all of my du'as except one dua. And so Imam Ahmed asks him, what's this one dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not accepted? He said that I made dua and narad Imam Ahmed, that I see Imam Ahmed rahimahullah, that I get to meet Imam Ahmed rahimahullah. And so Imam Ahmed rahimahullah, he's just shocked by this whole thing going on. And he says to the man, he says, "Ha hu Allah ya'tika bi Ahmed yajubbuhu bi rijlihi ila maqbasid." That this is Allah and all of His mighty and all His glory. That look at the work of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He has brought you Ahmed, and not only has He brought it to you, but He has brought him to you, dragging him by his legs. And so, jokingly, Imam Ahmad says to the man that, look, if it wasn't for your dua, I'd be able to sleep calmly and quietly in the masjid. But because of your dua, I was dragged to the middle of the street and brought to the bakery. But this just goes to show the power of this man's dua and of this man's dhikr, right? And it's not like if you ask somebody, or if somebody else is going by, you just think, okay, look, this is a normal man. He's just a normal baker. He's not doing anything crazy. There's no crazy good deed happening here. But without a doubt, the dhikr that he was doing was so magnificent in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that it didn't matter what type of dua this person made. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was going to accept that dua. And sometimes, like I mentioned earlier, it's not clear how these things play into each other. It's not clear how our dhikr is going to impact us or how our dua is going to impact us. But without a doubt, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's a promise of His that He's not going to let our good deeds go to waste. And there is no way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ever recant on a promise of His. And so we have to trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we have to hold on to this trust that even though we might not be seeing the benefits of our dua, the benefits of our dhikr, the benefits of our charity, the benefits of our salah in the immediate, without a doubt Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward us for them. And another point that I want to make is, as we are all aware, the conflict is still going on in Gaza, in Palestine. And the way I want to tie this in is that sometimes we may think that because we are so far away, that we might not be able to help financially, that there's nothing that we can do. We might feel that we are very limited in our ability to help these people. But that's not necessarily true. Like I just mentioned, there are some of these things that have outsized effect, outsized impact in the world in which we can't directly correlate. Who knows what our dua, who knows what our dhikr, who knows what our prayer for these people can do. And we might not even know even after the fact, right? You might make dua and might help someone down there, but you have no idea. Because that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala works. He works in mysterious ways. And so I request that all of us, we try to make dua for these people. We try to do our dhikr. We try to do the best that we can. We try to read our Quran. We try to be generous in whatever way we can so that we can also help these people and we keep them in our prayers. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد أيها الناس اتقوا الله واعلموا أن تقوى الله تعالى هي التي تقربكم إلى الله. قال الله تعالى إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم. فتقوى الله لها فوائد عظيمة ولذلك أوصى الله بها الأولين والآخرين فقال سبحانه وتعالى ولقد وصينا الذين أوتوا الكتاب من قبلكم وإياكم أن اتقوا الله. فتقوى الله فيها خيرات كثيرة ورتب الله عليها نتائج عظيمة. قال الله تعالى يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن تتقوا الله يجعل لكم فرقانا ويكفر عنكم سيئاتكم ويغفر لكم والله ذو الفضل العظيم. وقال أيضا ومن يتق الله يجعل له مخرجا ويرزقه من حيث لا يحتسب. وقال تعالى ومن يتق الله يجعل له من أمره يسرا. ووعد الله للمتقين الجنة فقال إن المتقين في جنات وعيون وقال إن المتقين في جنات ونعيم. فاتقوا الله يا عباد الله واحرصوا على تحقيق التقوى في حياتكم حتى تفوزوا برضوان رب الأرض والسماوات وتنعموا يوم تلقونه بنعيم الجنات. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وعلى الصحابة والتابعين خصوصا على الخلفاء الراشدين المهديين وعلى من تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين وأذل الشرك والمشركين ودمر أعداء الدين واجعل هذا البلد آمنا مطمئنا وسائر بلاد المسلمين. اللهم إنا نسألك العفو والعافية في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم إنا نعوذ بك من البرص والجنون والجذام ومن سيء الأسقام. اللهم ارفع عنا البلاء والوباء. عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. فاذكروا الله العلي العظيم وادعوه يستجب لكم ولذكر الله تعالى أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون. الصلاة. الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
شعرها وين كتقول
الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. هل أتاك حديث الغاشية وجوه يومئذ خاشعة عاملة ناصبة تسقى من عين آنية ليس لهم طعام إلا من ضريع لا يسمن ولا يغني من جوع وجوه يومئذ ناعمة لسعيها راضية في جنة عالية لا تسمع فيها لاغية فيها عين جارية فيها سرر مرفوعة وأكواب مرفوعة ونمارق مصفوفة وزرابي مبثوثة أفلا ينظرون إلى الإبل كيف خلقت وإلى السماء كيف رفعت وإلى الجبال كيف نصبت وإلى الأرض كيف سطحت فذكر إنما أنت مذكر لست عليهم بمسيطر إلا من تولى وكفر فيعذبه الله العذاب الأكبر إن إلينا إيابهم ثم إن علينا حسابهم الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين سبح اسم ربك الأعلى الذي خلق فسوى والذي قدر فهدى والذي أخرج المرعى فجعله غثاء أحوى سنقرئك فلا تنسى إلا ما شاء الله إنه يعلم الجهر وما يخفى وييسرك لليسرى فذكر إن نفعت الذكرى سيذكر من يخشى ويتجنبها الأشقى الذي يصلى النار الكبرى ثم لا يموت فيها ولا يحيا قد أفلح من تزكى وذكر اسم ربه فصلى بل تؤثرون الحياة الدنيا والآخرة خير وأبقى إن هذا لفي الصحف الأولى صحف إبراهيم وموسى الله سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر السلام عليكم ورحمة الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله